Rancher. Wanted a slim bride but got a black, curvy one instead.
The dusty stagecoach door swung open as the weathered cowboy squinted through the Texas heat, expecting his ordered bride, only to watch a proud, full-figured woman step down with quiet dignity. The gathered townsfolk erupted in cruel whispers and mocking laughter, their eyes cutting like knives as they dismissed her as a mistake, destined for the next coach back east. They assumed she'd crumble within days, broken by their scorn and the rancher's inevitable rejection. But the mountain of a man found himself unexpectedly stirred, torn between shame and something deeper he couldn't name. Neither knew that hidden beneath their awkward beginning lay secrets that could destroy reputations, expose devastating truths, and forever change who holds power in this unforgiving frontier town. Would prejudice triumph, or could an impossible connection rewrite everything they thought they knew about love? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun blazed over Boston's grimy streets as Jubilee Bell clutched her teaching certificates with trembling hands. Her guardian's drunken rage still echoed in her ears from the night before. The bruise on her arm throbbed beneath her long sleeves. She had scraped together every penny for the mail-order bride arrangement. Texas seemed like salvation compared to the hell she was leaving behind. The marriage broker had taken her money with greedy fingers and promised her a fresh start with a respectable rancher. 3 states away in Copper Ridge, Texas, Silas Redmond stared helplessly at the contract spread across his kitchen table. The words might as well have been hieroglyphs. He pushed the papers toward Calvin Moore, his mixed-race stable hand who had become his secret lifeline. Calvin's weathered finger traced the fine print. His voice was gentle but concerned. The cattle buyers were offering less than fair market value. Again. Silas nodded grimly. He had built his ranch through sweat and determination, but numbers on paper remained his greatest enemy. The shame burned in his chest. A grown man who couldn't read his own business contracts. Meanwhile, town gossip Edna Holloway studied the ledgers in her deceased husband's office. The debt numbers stared back at her like accusations. Her late husband had left her drowning in financial obligations that could destroy her reputation. The eastern land developers had made their offer clear. Help them acquire the smaller ranches, and her debts would disappear. She had already paid the marriage broker handsomely to ensure Silas Redmond's bride arrangement would fail spectacularly. The stagecoach rumbled into Copper Ridge on a sweltering Thursday afternoon. Half the town had gathered at the depot, drawn by curiosity about their bachelor rancher's mail-order bride. Silas stood rigid beside his wagon, collar tight around his neck. He clutched the photograph the broker had sent, a petite woman with pale skin and delicate features. The coach door swung open. Jubilee Bell stepped down with careful dignity. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration from the journey. Her figure was full and proud, nothing like the photograph Silas held. She wore her finest dress and carried herself with the bearing of an educated woman, but her worn carpetbag told the story of her desperate circumstances. The crowd fell silent. Then the whispers began. Edna Holloway's eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction. This was better than she had hoped. She began her work immediately, leaning close to the nearest woman with practiced concern. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. This was not what he had ordered, not what he had expected. The shame and confusion hit him like a physical blow, but something else stirred beneath it. The woman's composure in the face of obvious hostility impressed him despite himself. Jubilee surveyed the hostile faces surrounding her. She had faced prejudice before, but never so openly displayed. Still, she kept her chin high. She had nowhere else to go. The silence stretched until Silas found his voice. He offered her a trial period of 1 month instead of immediate rejection. The crowd murmured with disappointment. They had expected a more dramatic scene. Jubilee accepted without hesitation. 1 month to prove her worth to people who had already judged her. She had survived worse odds. Calvin watched the exchange with knowing eyes. He recognized the fear behind Silas's gruff exterior and the steel beneath Jubilee's quiet dignity. This arrangement might surprise everyone. Over the following days, Jubilee threw herself into ranch work with determination that surprised the watching townspeople. She learned quickly and complained rarely. But the isolation was crushing. Shop owners served her reluctantly. Women crossed streets to avoid her. Children stared with wide eyes until their mothers yanked them away. Silas found himself stealing glances at her throughout each day. She attacked every task with intelligence and persistence. When she reorganized his chaotic office, she asked no questions about the scattered papers and abandoned correspondence. But he caught her looking at the mess with puzzled concern. The breaking point came when Silas misread another contract. The grain supplier had charged him double the agreed price, but the numbers swam meaninglessly before his eyes. His frustration boiled over, and he swept the papers to the floor in rage. Jubilee appeared in the doorway. She had heard the commotion from the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. Without a word, she began gathering the scattered documents. As she organized them, understanding dawned in her eyes. The careful way he avoided reading anything in front of others. How he relied on Calvin for assistance with paperwork. The shame that clouded his features whenever documents required his attention. The powerful rancher who held her fate in his hands could not read. That evening, she approached him carefully. She offered to help organize his business records. He agreed reluctantly, expecting judgment or mockery. Instead, she began teaching him his letters by lamplight. Her voice was patient and encouraging. She had taught freedmen's children in Boston, using methods designed for adults ashamed of their ignorance. For the first time since her arrival, Silas looked at her without defensiveness. Here was someone who understood shame and offered hope instead of judgment. Their evening lessons became sacred time. Away from the town's prying eyes, teacher and student discovered mutual respect. Jubilee found purpose in her exile. Silas found possibility in his limitation. But Edna Holloway was watching and planning. The month was almost over, and her conspiracy required Jubilee's complete failure. The third week brought new challenges. Jubilee's small victories around the ranch were overshadowed by the town's growing hostility. Women clutched their children closer when she passed. Merchants served her with barely concealed disgust. The general store owner made her wait until all other customers had finished before acknowledging her presence. Silas noticed the treatment but said nothing. His own shame at needing her help with reading made him retreat into silence during daylight hours. Only in the evenings did he come alive, hunched over letters and numbers by flickering lamplight. Calvin observed everything from the shadows. He had learned long ago to make himself invisible when tensions ran high. But he saw how Jubilee's shoulders straightened each morning, despite the previous day's humiliations. He recognized the same stubborn dignity his own mother had carried. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. Silas successfully read an entire sentence without help. His weathered finger traced each word as he sounded them out. The grain contract that had frustrated him for weeks finally made sense. Jubilee smiled with genuine pride. For the first time since arriving in Copper Ridge, she felt truly useful. Her education had value here, even if the town refused to see it. Edna Holloway paced her parlor like a caged animal. The arrangement should have collapsed by now. Instead, disturbing rumors reached her ears. Some claimed to have seen lights burning late in the ranch house windows. Others whispered about Silas defending his houseguest when pressed for gossip. She called an emergency meeting with the town council. The men gathered in the back room of the general store, their faces grim with manufactured concern. Edna painted a picture of moral decay and social disruption. An unmarried woman living openly with a bachelor was scandalous enough. but this particular situation demanded immediate action. The council agreed unanimously. Silas would receive an ultimatum within the week. Meanwhile, Jubilee discovered the truth about Silas's correspondence. While organizing his desk, she found letters in multiple handwritings, all supposedly from him, but clearly penned by different hands. The local school teacher had been writing his business letters. The preacher had handled personal correspondence. Even Calvin had attempted some of the simpler notes. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. This proud, capable man had been living a desperate charade. Every business dealing, every contract, every simple transaction had required him to expose his vulnerability to others. The shame must have been crushing. That evening, she approached the subject gently. Silas confirmed her suspicions with bitter resignation. He had learned to hide his illiteracy behind gruff authority and careful delegation. But the constant fear of exposure had made him suspicious of everyone except her. Jubilee understood his situation in ways others could not. In Boston, she had taught grown men who worked all day and learned their letters by candlelight. Former slaves who had been forbidden education now hungered for knowledge with desperate intensity. She had developed methods to teach without judgment, to build confidence while imparting skills. Silas proved to be a determined student. His hands, so skilled with rope and tools, struggled to form letters. But his mind grasped concepts quickly once she found the right approach. She connected reading to his ranch work. Cattle brands became letters. Fence patterns became words. Their evening sessions grew longer. Trust developed between them, fragile but real. Silas began asking questions about her life in Boston. Jubilee shared carefully edited stories about her teaching work, omitting the abuse that had driven her west. Calvin watched their growing connection with quiet satisfaction. He had hoped Silas might find someone who saw past his limitations. But he also noticed Edna's increased activity around town. Trouble was brewing. The ultimatum arrived on Friday morning. 3 stern-faced council members delivered it personally. Silas could marry his house guest immediately, or send her away within the week. The moral standards of Copper Ridge would not be compromised. Jubilee overheard the conversation from the kitchen. Their words cut deep, but not as much as Silas's response. He promised to consider their demands carefully. He did not defend her. He did not challenge their assumptions. That evening, she confronted him directly. Marriage based on social pressure would be a mockery of everything they had built together. She had escaped one prison, only to walk into another. Her dignity was worth more than his reputation. Silas struggled to find words for feelings he barely understood. Jubilee had become precious to him, but not because of any arrangement. Her intelligence challenged him. Her patience humbled him. Her strength inspired him. But the town's pressure was real. His business depended on community goodwill. Other ranchers might refuse to deal with him if he openly defied social expectations. Jubilee made the decision for both of them. She would leave the ranch and find her own way in town. If they were meant to be together, it would happen honestly, or not at all. The next morning, she packed her few belongings and moved to the boarding house. Calvin helped her transport her things without comment, but his disapproval was evident. Some fights were worth having, even if the odds were poor. Word of the separation spread quickly. Edna Holloway celebrated privately while maintaining a facade of Christian concern. The first phase of her plan had succeeded. Now, she needed to ensure Jubilee left town entirely before discovering anything she should not know. But Jubilee had no intention of running again. She rented a small room and began planning her next move. Calvin offered her the use of his stable's back room during afternoons. She had an idea that might change everything.
The town's children needed education. Their parents might hate her, but they wanted their offspring to have opportunities. She would start a school and prove her worth on her own terms. The boarding house room was cramped and stifling, but Jubilee refused to let despair take hold. She had survived worse circumstances. Within 2 days, she had transformed the space into a makeshift classroom. Her teaching certificates hung on the wall like badges of honor. Calvin appeared at her door on Wednesday morning. He offered the use of his stable's back room without explanation. His weathered face remained neutral, but his eyes held kindness. She accepted gratefully. The stable room was larger and better ventilated. Jubilee scrubbed it clean and arranged makeshift desks from wooden crates. She posted a simple sign outside, advertising reading and arithmetic lessons for children. The rates were modest, payment optional for struggling families. Her first student arrived on Thursday, a shy girl of 8 whose mother had sent her in secret. The woman waited nervously outside while her daughter learned her letters. Others soon followed, parents sneaking their children to education like contraband. Silas noticed the decreased activity around Calvin's stable, but asked no questions. His own reading had stagnated without Jubilee's patient guidance. Business correspondence piled up on his desk, mocking his newfound but incomplete skills. The ranch felt empty without her presence. He spent evenings attempting to write a letter expressing his true feelings. The words came slowly, scratched out and rewritten until the paper was nearly black with ink. His confession of love looked clumsy on paper, but it was honestly his own work. Edna Holloway discovered the school within a week. Her network of gossips reported the suspicious comings and goings around Calvin's property. She watched from across the street as children emerged with books and slates, their faces bright with learning. This development threatened her carefully laid plans. An established teacher with community support would be harder to drive away. She began spreading rumors about inappropriate influences on innocent children. Fear was always more effective than facts. The pressure mounted quickly. Some parents withdrew their children after visits from concerned neighbors. Others defied the social pressure, but demanded absolute secrecy. Jubilee found herself teaching in whispers, her students glancing nervously at windows. Calvin stood guard without being asked. His presence deterred the most aggressive troublemakers, but even he could not shield her from the whispered threats and anonymous warnings slipped under her door. Meanwhile, Jubilee had begun noticing patterns in the town's business dealings. Parents paying for lessons often mentioned financial struggles, ranchers facing pressure to sell their land, contract disputes that seemed designed to favor outside buyers. Her analytical mind, sharpened by years of teaching and legal document review in Boston, detected something systematic in the chaos. Someone was orchestrating the community's economic troubles. Silas finally completed his letter on a Sunday evening. The words were simple but heartfelt. He admitted his initial prejudice and growing admiration. He confessed his fears about illiteracy and his gratitude for her teaching. Most importantly, he declared his love without conditions or expectations. Calvin delivered the letter Monday morning. Jubilee read it twice, her heart softening despite her resolve. Silas had grown tremendously during their time together. His humility and determination had impressed her more than his initial appearance ever could. But she would not return to the ranch as a rescued woman. If they had a future, it would be built on equal ground. The town meeting was inevitable. Edna organized it under the guise of community concern about moral standards and proper education. The church filled with anxious parents and curious onlookers. Silas attended reluctantly, positioned in the back where his discomfort was less obvious. Edna spoke first, painting Jubilee as a disruptive influence corrupting innocent children. She questioned the quality of education from someone who had arrived under such scandalous circumstances. Her words were carefully chosen to inflame prejudices without crossing into overt cruelty. Several parents defended the school hesitantly. Their children had learned more in 2 weeks than in months of previous attempts at education. But their voices were drowned out by manufactured outrage. Silas stood up slowly. His bulk commanded attention even when his voice did not. He spoke carefully, using words Jubilee had taught him. He defended her character and teaching ability without revealing the extent of their relationship. His public support surprised everyone, including Jubilee. But it also painted her as dependent on his protection, the very thing she had tried to avoid. The meeting ended without resolution, but the damage was done. More parents withdrew their children. The few remaining families demanded even greater secrecy. Jubilee's school was dying under the weight of social pressure. That night, she sat in her boarding house room reviewing her dwindling options. Return to Boston and face her abusive guardian. Move to another frontier town and start over again. Or fight for her place in Copper Ridge, despite the odds. Calvin knocked softly on her door. He brought disturbing news from the stable. Strange men had been asking questions about property values and ranch ownership. The same Eastern accents she remembered from the marriage broker's office. Something bigger was happening in Copper Ridge. The hostility toward her might be connected to a larger conspiracy. Her education and analytical skills were needed for more than teaching children. The next morning brought fresh evidence. A rancher's daughter mentioned her father's forced sale to mysterious buyers. Another parent whispered about contract disputes that seemed designed to fail. The pattern was becoming clearer. Jubilee made her decision. She would not run from Copper Ridge. The community needed her skills, whether they recognized it or not. Someone was systematically destroying the town's economic foundation, and she might be the only person positioned to expose the truth. Her fight was no longer just about acceptance or love. The entire town's survival was at stake. Jubilee's investigation began with careful observation. She positioned herself at the general store each morning, listening to conversations while pretending to examine goods she could not afford. The patterns emerged slowly but clearly. 3 ranches had sold to Eastern buyers within the past month. Each sale followed the same sequence of events. Mysterious cattle disappearances, contract disputes with suppliers, bank pressure over suddenly called loans, then desperate owners accepting lowball offers from well-dressed strangers. The buyers all represented the same company, though they used different names when speaking to different sellers. Jubilee's sharp memory caught the inconsistencies that others missed. Her school had dwindled to 4 brave students whose parents defied community pressure. She used the extra time to map out property sales and financial transactions. The web of manipulation became clearer with each passing day. Calvin provided crucial intelligence without being asked. His work around town gave him access to conversations others missed. Stable owners heard everything eventually. Drunk men spoke carelessly around those they considered invisible. The pattern was sophisticated and ruthless. Someone with inside knowledge was coordinating the attacks on local ranchers. Someone who understood the community well enough to exploit its weaknesses. Silas struggled with his own problems. Without Jubilee's guidance, his reading progress had stalled. The letter he had sent her remained unanswered, though Calvin confirmed its delivery. His pride prevented him from seeking her out directly. His ranch faced the same pressures affecting other properties. Suppliers demanded payment in advance. Buyers offered reduced prices. Even longtime business partners seemed reluctant to maintain normal relationships. The isolation was crushing. He had never realized how much he had come to depend on Jubilee's presence. Not just for reading instruction, but for companionship and intellectual stimulation. The evenings felt empty without their educational sessions. Calvin found him staring at unopened correspondence one evening. The stack of letters and contracts had grown intimidating in Jubilee's absence. Silas's newfound confidence was crumbling under the weight of his limitations. Calvin suggested the obvious solution: swallow pride and ask for help. Jubilee had never shown anything but patience with his learning difficulties. Her silence might indicate busy schedules rather than rejection. Meanwhile, Jubilee had uncovered the most disturbing evidence yet. The marriage broker who had arranged her disastrous match had received payment from someone in Copper Ridge. The same broker who had sent her photograph to create maximum shock and disappointment. Her arrival had been orchestrated as a scandal from the beginning. Someone had wanted Silas humiliated and distracted. Someone who benefited from his ranch being vulnerable to outside pressure. The revelation stung personally, but clarified her mission. She was not just an unwanted bride caught in circumstance. She was a deliberate weapon aimed at destroying Silas's stability and business relationships. Edna Holloway's increased activity around town took on new significance. The woman's financial troubles were well known, but her sudden confidence suggested outside support. Her coordination of opposition to Jubilee's school had been remarkably efficient and well-funded. Jubilee began watching Edna more carefully. The widow met regularly with strangers at the hotel restaurant, always well-dressed Eastern men who paid for expensive meals and left generous tips. Men who showed unusual interest in local property values and ownership records. The connection became undeniable when Jubilee recognized one of the men from Boston, a lawyer who had worked with predatory lenders targeting desperate property owners. His presence in Copper Ridge could only mean large-scale financial manipulation. She needed proof that would convince the community. Personal observations and logical deductions would not overcome the prejudice against her testimony. She required documented evidence of the conspiracy. The opportunity came when Edna hosted a dinner party for visiting businessmen. The hotel dining room buzzed with conversation about land acquisitions and development plans. Jubilee positioned herself in the kitchen, offering to help serve in exchange for a meal. The Eastern accents carried clearly through the thin walls. Names were mentioned. Dollar amounts discussed. Timeline coordinates for completing the acquisition of remaining properties. Most significantly, praise for their local coordinators' effectiveness in destabilizing target ranches. Edna's voice rose above the others, reporting on her success in creating scandal around Silas's arrangement. The mail-order bride debacle had exceeded expectations. Community pressure would force him to sell within weeks. Jubilee memorized every detail while maintaining her serving duties. The men never looked directly at her, confirming their assumption that servants were invisible and harmless. Their arrogance would be their downfall. She slipped away before the meal ended and spent the night documenting everything she had heard. Names, dates, amounts, and specific plans for acquiring the remaining independent ranches. The conspiracy was vast and nearly complete, but she needed physical evidence to support her testimony. Witness accounts from someone of her social standing would be dismissed without corroboration. She required documents or other proof that could not be explained away. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of her remaining students mentioned her mother's cleaning work at the hotel. The woman had access to guest rooms and wastebaskets. Discarded papers might contain the evidence Jubilee needed. The cleaning woman agreed to help after Jubilee explained the situation. Her own husband faced pressure to sell their small farm. She understood the stakes, personally and intimately. Within 2 days, she delivered a collection of crumpled documents, draft contracts, correspondence, and financial records carelessly thrown away by confident conspirators. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jubilee spread the papers across her boarding house floor and began organizing the proof of Copper Ridge's systematic destruction. The community's survival depended on exposing the truth before more families lost everything. Her personal fight for acceptance had become a battle for everyone's future. The recovered documents painted a picture of calculated devastation. Jubilee organized the evidence methodically, her teaching experience serving her well. Each paper represented another family's potential ruin. The conspiracy reached deeper than anyone had imagined. A draft letter revealed the full scope of Edna's betrayal. She had provided detailed information about every ranch owner's vulnerabilities: financial struggles, family problems, business relationships. Her position as town gossip had made her invaluable to the eastern developers. The payment records were even more damning. Edna had received substantial sums for each successful property acquisition. The mail-order bride sabotage had earned her a bonus payment. Her financial desperation had transformed her into a weapon against her own community. Jubilee cross-referenced the documents with her observations. Every suspicious business deal now made sense. Contract disputes, supply problems, banking issues, all coordinated to pressure specific ranchers into selling quickly and cheaply. Silas's ranch was the primary target. His property controlled access to the best grazing land and water rights. Acquiring his holdings would give the developers leverage over every remaining independent operation. The timeline was urgent. According to the correspondence, the final phase would begin within days. Remaining holdouts would face coordinated pressure designed to force immediate sales. Families would lose generations of work in a matter of weeks. Calvin appeared at her door as she finished organizing the evidence. His expression was grim. Silas had received foreclosure papers that morning. The bank was demanding immediate payment on a loan that should not have been callable for another year. The papers contained suspicious clauses that had not been in the original agreement. Someone had altered the contract after signing. Silas could not read well enough to identify the changes, but the legal implications were devastating. Jubilee examined the foreclosure documents with growing anger. The modifications were subtle but effective. Legal language designed to confuse and intimidate. Her experience helping freedmen navigate predatory contracts in Boston had prepared her for exactly this type of deception. The alterations were recent and poorly integrated. A competent lawyer could challenge them successfully, but Copper Ridge had no resident attorney. The nearest legal help was 2 days away by stagecoach, too far to prevent immediate action, unless someone else possessed the knowledge to fight back. Jubilee had studied legal documents extensively during her Boston teaching work. She understood contract law, property rights, and foreclosure procedures. Her education could save Silas's ranch and expose the entire conspiracy simultaneously. But she needed the community's attention and trust. Her evidence would be meaningless if delivered by someone they refused to hear. The same prejudice that had driven her from Silas's ranch would undermine her testimony about the conspiracy. Calvin suggested a different approach. Let Silas present the evidence publicly. His standing in the community would give weight to the accusations. Jubilee could coach him on the legal complexities without appearing as the primary source. The plan had merit, but required Silas's cooperation. He would need to admit his literacy limitations publicly and acknowledge Jubilee's crucial role in uncovering the truth. His pride might prevent such vulnerability. They found him at the ranch, staring helplessly at the foreclosure papers. His shoulders sagged with defeat. The confident rancher who had built his property through determination and hard work looked broken by circumstances beyond his understanding. Jubilee spread her evidence across his kitchen table without preamble. The documents spoke for themselves: conspiracy, fraud, manipulation. His troubles were not personal failures, but deliberate attacks orchestrated by people he had trusted. Silas studied the papers with growing comprehension. His reading skills, though limited, were sufficient to grasp the essential facts. He had been systematically betrayed by his own community leader. The revelation transformed his despair into anger. Not the blind rage of earlier frustrations, but focused determination to fight back. He would not let his ranch fall to lies and manipulation. Jubilee outlined their options. Challenge the foreclosure in court. Expose Edna's role in the conspiracy. Rally other victims to resist the coordinated pressure. But success required public presentation of complex evidence to a hostile audience. Calvin volunteered to spread word about an emergency town meeting. The foreclosure threat would draw concerned ranchers. Fear of similar attacks would motivate attendance. Edna's supporters would come expecting to watch Silas's final humiliation. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening in the church. Silas spent the day practicing his presentation with Jubilee's coaching. He would need to explain legal complexities clearly while maintaining his credibility as a businessman. Jubilee prepared backup materials, charts showing the pattern of attacks, timelines connecting suspicious events, copies of the most damning correspondence, visual evidence that could speak louder than words. The evening arrived with unseasonable tension. The church filled beyond capacity with ranchers, shop owners, and curious townspeople. Edna arrived with her usual entourage of supporters, confident that the meeting would cement Silas's defeat. Silas stood at the front of the room, holding a folder of documents. His hands shook slightly, but his voice carried clearly when he began speaking. He started with his own situation, acknowledging the foreclosure threat and his initial confusion about the legal complexities. Then, he presented the evidence methodically. Each document supported the next. Names, dates, and amounts painted an undeniable picture of systematic fraud. The audience grew restless as the implications became clear. Edna's face went pale as her correspondence was read aloud. Her financial arrangements with Eastern developers, her reports on vulnerable ranchers, her bonus payment for sabotaging the mail-order bride arrangement. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Neighbors who had trusted her felt betrayed. Ranchers who had suffered mysterious setbacks now understood the source. The conspiracy was exposed completely. But Edna had one final desperate play. She stood and pointed accusingly at Jubilee, who had remained seated in the back of the room. Edna's finger trembled as she pointed toward the back of the church. Her voice cracked with desperation as she accused Jubilee of fabricating the evidence. A woman of questionable character and suspicious circumstances could not be trusted with such serious allegations. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jubilee, who rose slowly from her seat. She had anticipated this moment and prepared for it carefully. Her dignity remained intact despite the hostile stares. Silas stepped forward before she could speak. His voice carried new confidence as he defended her character and contributions. He admitted publicly that Jubilee had taught him to read the documents he had just presented. Without her education and analytical skills, the conspiracy would have succeeded completely. Several ranchers nodded grudgingly. They had witnessed the evidence with their own eyes. The documents were real regardless of who had discovered them. Their properties and livelihoods were at stake. Calvin stood up from his corner seat. His quiet voice carried surprising authority as he corroborated Jubilee's account. He had helped gather information and witnessed her painstaking organization of the evidence. Her dedication to exposing the truth had been absolute. Other voices joined in unexpected support. Parents whose children had attended her secret school praised her teaching abilities. The hotel cleaning woman confirmed her role in recovering the discarded documents. A network of quiet allies revealed themselves publicly for the first time. Edna's support crumbled rapidly. Her closest friends distanced themselves as the extent of her betrayal became clear. The Eastern developers' payments were documented precisely. Her role in coordinating attacks on neighbors was undeniable. The sheriff, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. The evidence warranted immediate investigation. Edna would face charges for fraud and conspiracy. The foreclosure against Silas would be suspended pending legal review. Jubilee approached the front of the church as the crowd began to disperse. She carried a folder containing additional documents she had prepared. Legal precedents for challenging fraudulent contracts, procedures for organizing community resistance to predatory land acquisition. She offered the information freely to anyone facing similar pressures. Her knowledge belonged to the community now, regardless of their previous treatment of her. The survival of Copper Ridge mattered more than personal grievances. Silas watched her distribute legal advice with growing admiration. The woman who had arrived as an unwanted burden had become their salvation. Her intelligence and determination had exposed threats that could have destroyed them all. He approached her as the church emptied. The folder in his hands contained the letter he had written weeks earlier. His declaration of love seemed inadequate now, but it represented his honest feelings before tonight's revelations. Jubilee read his carefully crafted words with tears in her eyes. The man who had struggled to write simple sentences had poured his heart onto paper. His growth and vulnerability touched her deeply. But she had one condition before accepting his proposal. Their marriage would be a true partnership of equals. She would continue teaching and using her legal knowledge to help the community. Her independence was non-negotiable. Silas agreed without hesitation. He had learned to value her mind as much as her heart. A wife who could read contracts and challenge injustice was exactly what he needed. What they all needed. The wedding took place 1 month later in the same church where the conspiracy had been exposed. Half the town attended, including families who had initially opposed Jubilee's presence. Community opinion had shifted dramatically once her true worth became apparent. Silas read his own vows from carefully written pages. Shit. Meta. Twig. Pause. Harassed 0.05. His literacy had improved steadily under Jubilee's continued instruction. The words were simple but heartfelt, promising partnership and mutual respect. Jubilee's school reopened with official community support. The back room of Calvin's stable was replaced by a proper classroom in the church basement. Parents who had once hidden their children's attendance now praised their teacher publicly. Calvin found his own place in the transformed community. His assistance in exposing the conspiracy had earned him recognition and respect. Jubilee hired him as her teaching assistant, giving him steady employment and social standing. The legal challenges against fraudulent contracts succeeded completely. Jubilee's knowledge of property law proved invaluable in court proceedings. Several families recovered land they had lost to deceptive practices. Edna faced justice swiftly. Her trial revealed the full scope of the Eastern developers' scheme. Similar conspiracies in other frontier towns were exposed and prosecuted. Her greed had ultimately protected countless communities from the same fate. The ranch prospered under joint management. Silas's practical experience combined with Jubilee's analytical skills created unprecedented success. Their partnership extended far beyond the romantic, encompassing every aspect of their shared life. Evening reading lessons continued, but now they read together for pleasure rather than necessity. Silas's confidence had grown tremendously. He handled business correspondence independently and took pride in his continued learning. The town evolved gradually, but permanently. Jubilee's presence had forced everyone to confront their assumptions and prejudices. The woman they had initially rejected had become indispensable to their survival and growth. Children who attended her school carried lessons in tolerance, along with reading and arithmetic. The next generation would grow up with different values, shaped by their teacher's example of dignity under pressure. 1 year after her arrival, Jubilee stood in her classroom watching students work quietly at their lessons. The scared woman who had stepped off the stagecoach had found her true home and purpose. The community that had rejected her had learned to treasure her contributions. Outside, Silas worked with Calvin to repair fence posts damaged in the recent storm. The ranch that had nearly fallen to conspiracy now stood stronger than ever. Trust and partnership had replaced suspicion and isolation. The mail-order bride arrangement that had begun in deception and disappointment had produced the love and justice Copper Ridge had desperately needed.